Colleagues, I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. To address our gallery, welcome to the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee meeting, and to advise that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committees, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibilitylondon.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And to make a specific request to this meeting, we invite those interested to contact sppc@london.ca. As required, the committee will recess at approximately 6:30 p.m. unless all their business is attended to at that point. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Turner.
Your Worship, not directly on the agenda today, but since there is a budget item or budget discussion, I'll reiterate the conflicts of anything pertaining to child reach services, as my wife is an employee there, or anything with respect to the Middlesex London Health Unit, as the Middlesex London Health Unit is my employer.
So noted. Any other disclosures? Colleagues, before we get into the consent agenda, I think it's only appropriate that we acknowledge someone that's in the gallery. Now, there's many nice people in the gallery that we could acknowledge, but if you'd allow me today, we have Michael Goldrup, who is our Director of People Services, and this is his first meeting of SPPC. We're delighted to welcome him here. Congratulations and welcome to City Hall, sir. I noticed that when Bill Coxhead was leaving, the applause was even louder. I'm not sure what that means. I don't want to make any assumptions or presumptions accordingly. So we have two items on the consent agenda, 2.1, 2.2. One is an information report that we're asked to receive for information, and the 2.2 is a referral to the budget process. Does anyone want either of those dealt with separately? Failing that, I'll look for a motion to receive. To move the consent agenda. Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any other comments or discussion? Councillor Squire.
I have one question, and I was away for the presentation of the budget. I was on holiday. So what I'm trying to understand is the difference between the base budget we talked about previously and the base budget that we're talking about now. In looking at this report and the reductions and that they will have on the base budget, am I correct in assuming that all of the other boards and commission reports as submitted, whether they had an increase of 3%, 4%, 5%, are now included in the base budget at those amounts?
Ms. Barbone.
Yes, through the chair. So everything as submitted in that base budget, this is an additional 0.2 reductions that are being added or taken off of that other total impact, but everything has been incorporated to date as submitted.
Councillor Squire.
So just so I'm really clear, if someone, it doesn't matter what their submission was to us as a city council and whether it met the parameters that we set, it's now part of the base budget?
Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, based on what was submitted and approved by those boards, those have, unless there were changes that were made by the boards and commissions of the city, those have been incorporated for council's review as they were submitted.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just quickly with respect to potential reduction number 34, which is the transference of portion to the Conservation Authority cost to the wastewater and treatment budget. In looking at the more detailed case example, it talks about a reduction to the levy of about $16 per household. And then on the other side, it looks at a tax impact, a levy reduction of about $13 and a tax impact to the wastewater levy of about $16 per person or per household. So it looks like a $3 net difference, and it becomes more expensive per household by doing the shift. Is that an appropriate read of this, or am I missing something through it?
Ms. Barbo, this may help in our deliberations. I know at this point we have motioned to accept receiving and referral to the budget process, but that may help us in our deliberation. Do you have a comment, please?
Yes, thank you through the chair. So that difference is the metrics. So based on the tax levy, that'll be across the entire budget impact, whereas the others are only rate supported. So the metric is a little bit different in terms of what the base is. So in terms of a dollar impact, it is a slightly higher, but it's because the metric is a little bit different based on the usage.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thanks. So that's what I kind of perceived was based on the user profiles, the amount, industrial, commercial, residential, all those different usage profiles, that the net impact is 13 versus 16. And since we really talk about average impact per household, there's a $3 difference. So it ends up being more expensive to households by shifting it from the tax levy to the water wastewater levy. Is that correct? Recognizing that we're talking about two different groups, but the way we're phrasing it is on a per household basis.
Ms. Barbo?
As an average per the metric, yes, it does work out to be, it's basically because the metrics aren't exactly the same and they're spread out among different groups of users. So because that is all across different, it's a smaller number of users when you look at that just because of the corporations and things like that. But it does work out slightly differently in terms of the metrics that's just the math, the way it works out.
Councillor, you're good? Thank you. Any other comments or questions? You were scratching your cheek there, Councillor Lyman. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. And through you, first I have a question to our staff with regard to the cases that have come back for potential reductions, and then I have a comment. But I'll start with the question. Was it made clear to our boards and commissions that when we asked them to come back with potential reductions to their asks, that we were not expecting them to all come back with 1.5% budget asks? You know, the police made an adjustment. They're still not at 1.5%, but they did make an adjustment for us. The library made an adjustment. It's not 1.5%, but they did make an adjustment for us. Was it clear to all the boards and commissions that when we asked them for potential reductions, it wasn't 1.5% or stand pat with your ask, that somewhere in between was also an option?
Ms. Barbo?
Thank you through the chair. Yes, all of the finance staff reached out to the various boards and commissions to work with them to look, and I believe also our budget chair did assist in that regard also, to encourage all of the boards and commissions to submit something or at least identify what the impact was going to be should they not wish to proceed and put something forward for council's consideration.
Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the reason I ask that is, you know, I look at the response we received from the LTC. In order to meet the 1.5% average budget, and then it goes into, you know, the Armageddon that would be for our transit system if they had to go to 1.5%. And we didn't ask them to do that. We asked them to come back with some potential reductions. I give the police full credit for coming back with a reduction. Our CFO for the London Public Library is in the gallery tonight. I know she and the board worked very, very hard, along with our budget chair, Councillor Morgan, to come back with some potential reductions to the library's ask, and they took into consideration things like, would the core area action plan help offset some of the security concerns that they've had? And in fact, the board agreed that, yes, we think the core area action plan would help with that, and so we could see the potential to not ask for more there. So it's very disappointing to see when boards like the library put in so many hours of time and effort, talk to Councillor Morgan as the budget chair, talk to our staff. Emily put in countless hours on this, I know she did. We've had several discussions about it. And to have boards and commissions come back and just say, no, we can't get to 1.5%, so we're not offering any potential reductions is really frustrating and disappointing. And I just want to be clear that that's how I'm feeling tonight is some made an effort and others did not. And it's disappointing that we saw some not make an effort.
my sense is we'll have that opportunity as we go into more detail on the budget process for you to have other comments and solicit the opinions of other colleagues. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. And I wasn't going to weigh in, but when I hear comments that maybe other boards have not done their due diligence, I do have to defend the board that I sit on. And first of all, I sit on the Upper Thames Conservation Authority Board. We, for the past couple of months at every board meeting, are discussing the budget, making changes, reducing as we move forward. We have not approved the budget yet. That will be done this month. So I think I understand we may not know what all the other boards are doing, but Council did send a message out to boards to do their utmost in reducing their budgets, to come to the 1.5. We right now do not know how that looks. I agree with you, Mr. Chair. We will do that deep dive as we go through the budget process, but I did feel, I think it's very easy to go through a negative, to start off negatively with our boards and commissions is not a good way to start the budget process. So I would just like to defend all boards and commissions that I'm sure they are dealing with the challenges that they're faced with, and we have to have that open mind.
Thank you. Perhaps we can all agree that hope springs eternal, so we'll see how the budget process works accordingly. Any other comments or questions before we call the question? Seeing none. Oh, excuse me. Councillor Lehman, then Councillor Turner.
This is just a question I've been getting. We see impacts that on the average taxpayer, and the number that we see is $241,000 for the average assessed value, but I read in the paper all the time that the average price of a home is rising and it's $400,000 and up and up. Can you explain that through you, Chair, to myself and folks that are tuning in, that discrepancy?
Ms. Barbon?
Thank you, through the chair. So the way the assessment process works is that MPAC assesses at the value of the home at a certain point in time. So these values are operating on not the current values. So there is a reassessment process that's going in, but right now, based on the 2019 values, those are essentially phased in values from what was MPAC assessed in 2016. So there's a lag between what is the assessment and what MPAC assesses at a period of time that is phased in over the next following 4 years versus what the actual price of a home. So they tend to follow the same trend because they're lagging in timing with respect to that. But essentially, when they do that, they do the assessment, they do that across all the properties at that point in time. They phase it in over the next 4 years. So at that point, when it's fully assessed in 2019, that's actually the value that MPAC assessed in 2016. And 2020, there's another one that's going through that will start to make the changes again. So this year is a big year, but with respect to that, it will never be a current point in time. So people's homes will be at different prices today than what MPAC is currently assessing them on at the point in time that they pick.
Councillor?
So just to be clear, 2020 is when there's the next MPAC reassessment, is that correct? And there's been a dramatic increase in the price of houses since 2016. However, we're using a lower figure of 2016. People are concerned that, we say, well, that works out to X amount of dollars per house, but that soon in this year, that number will change dramatically. Do we have any idea of what that number is going to look like?
Ms. Barbon?
So through the chair, that whole process of the MPAC reassessment essentially all across the board retains, so even though the reassessment will come forward, what will likely happen is there's changes between classes. But overall, from a reassessment, the impact on taxes is actually neutral. So what that does is based on the assessment value, we still collect the same amount of taxes. And that assessment value, which if we refer back to some of the presentation that I did at the budget tabling, determines how big that pie is essentially based on the budget. That's spread across all of the assessment at that time. So when there's a reassessment, that that doesn't actually change your taxes. It just redistributes how that pie might be done, how it's divvied up based on where some of the changes might be. So if you're above the average of the change in assessment, your taxes might increase slightly higher than the average that we used. And if you're below, it would decrease slightly below the average that we used. So it's all relative and neutral. So we still don't have all of the final numbers, but we're working through a process, and there will be a report coming forward when we have all the values that have been received from MPAC to provide to council.
Councillor Turner.
I just really briefly wanted to comment on the feedback portion. With Appendix A, and I just wanted to highlight this part, that question 1, please rank 3 service groupings that are most valued to you and your family, and question 2, please rank the least value. I find that question, and I hope we can refrain from using this one in the future. The spectrum of services that the city provides work in concert with each other, and they're all of immense value. When we try to rank, when we ask the public to rank these services in preference, there's a fair amount of assumption that that there's an equal level of knowledge about what all of these service areas do for the city and how they service the city, how they contribute to the general well-being of the population. But that's not true, and so you see these skews that seem to. When we ask the question, it seems to be asking in a leading way to say, where do we want to put money? And that's not necessarily reflective of where we should be putting resources and financing in the city's budget, just based on service area preference of the population. I think if we were to take a look at program level enhancements and things like that, those are appropriate questions to ask, but this is a really nebulous question for us to put through a budget consultation process. And I don't know if it gives us much useful feedback, and I think it ends up pitting service area against service area within the city, and I'm not sure if that's fair in recognition of the immense value that each of these service areas provides to citizens of London.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I wanted to make 2 comments. The first is based on something Councillor Lehman said and then our treasurer responded to. I think one of the challenges in the budget process, certainly that we worked through the last multi-year budget when we had I think it was a tax calculator online, was getting people to enter the right value into the tax calculator, because people have a sense on what they feel their homes are worth. They may have even had an assessment by a realtor, but that is not the rate at which their homes are taxed on. So the MPAC assessed values that are phased in over time are the rates that homes are taxed on. And even then, as the treasurer said, we still collect the same amount of tax overall. So the tax rate actually adjusts as the MPAC valuations change so that we collect the same amount. So it makes it very difficult. Essentially, everybody has their own individual tax rate at the end of the day because everybody has different assessed values. It's very difficult to communicate that, but I did want to take the opportunity to point out that our finance team has put together a series of videos called Finance Flicks that are on the city's website that actually explain very clearly how taxes are collected, how MPAC assessments work, and how they all factor into the individual tax rates that Londoners pay. And I've certainly been sharing that with Londoners who've reached out asking questions about their tax. The most common question I get is, the city should have a big windfall of dollars because all of the houses have gone up in value. And that's simply not true because of the way that it works. So kudos to our staff who a few years ago put together these videos. They're still very relevant today, and certainly sharing those will help answer a lot of these questions. So I said I had 2 things, but I'll just leave it at 1 to save time.
Perfect. Councillor Van Holst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I too wanted to talk about the public feedback. I'll just stress again the comment that Councillor Turner had made with the first question, asking people to rank the departments seems difficult. It's almost like saying to prioritize feet or legs or organs or brains, something like that, when you obviously need them all. More actions might be good. Is the mani-pedi more important than the dialysis? There's something that people could dig into. I'd like to see us ask questions about specific investments. For instance, we talked maybe last year about Picking garbage up on the same day every week would be about $10 extra. So just asking people, would you be willing to make this investment? I think that kind of thing would be very valuable. I also want to just thank everyone who participated in this. I find it very helpful to have all the comments in one place. Reading through this is an easy way to go about it. And if I were to digest with you, Mr. Mayor and the staff, I'd say maybe next time we can separate out the edited ones, put them in a separate section. They could be like Mad Libs, you know, please clean up the blank, you blank blank, and that might be fun. But thank you.
So noted. Thank you. Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions, three to staff. The public participation engagement sessions we have coming up that are listed on the city's website, as I know some city councillors, including myself, are adding ward-specific ones. Will ours be added to that system as we confirm the dates with the budget staff?
Ms. Barbone, will you take that?
Yes, thank you. I was just checking to make sure that we were, and they've said, yes, we will be adding those as they are known to the website.
Councillor Pelosi.
Thank you, just because I know some of them start this weekend, wanting to make sure that we have enough opportunities to engage with the public and make most of every opportunity. I also wanted to thank the public for giving the feedback that they did. Thanking staff, I see some edits in here of profanity that's been removed, so thank you for that. And following up on Councillor Turner's point, and having read through all the comments myself and highlighting a variety of them, was also concerned about the public's feedback. Some are saying, you know, why are you giving us an option of what matters when some of it we can't cut? We just have to do it, it's legislated, which I thought was a valid and fair question. Taking it as an opportunity to educate the public about what we can and can't do for funding, and also about how we're partners in other levels of government. A lot of these comments come back since we asked about social and health services. It led to an onslaught of things that aren't in our jurisdiction of senior dental care, Thames Valley Children's Center, Tyke Talk, childcare subsidies, nurses, doctors, hospitals, mental health services, addictions, homelessness. With this public feedback, are we doing anything to make sure that our other colleagues in other levels of government are aware of the needs of Londoners? Like, how are we sharing this up the chain, that as we're asking for partners in funding, of what can be done? This is just another opportunity of, this is the Londoners' voice of what they need.
Ms. Barbone, perhaps I can start with that, and then I'll throw that back to you. I will tell you that in part to that answer, only because I'm personally involved in it, we have one of our federal ministers coming in tomorrow related to issues around housing, specifically in the affordable and geared income housing, and issues relating to Indigenous supports as well. So that's a direct representation, and I've been involved in a meeting with Ms. Daters-Beer on this issue as well. And we have some other meetings with ministers intended as well to deliver that message home. So I want to be clear that that's absolutely important. I've said time and again, and we know this, colleagues, that no municipality can do this alone, and London particularly because of its geographic centric base, and it's we have challenges that I think are fairly dramatic. So we do that with the support of our provincial and federal counterparts. But Ms. Barbone, that's just something that's very specific in relation to my meeting tomorrow. Do you want to add to any of that?
Through the chair, I think the only thing I would add is this is the feedback that we've received. We're communicating it out, and I think whatever opportunities that this might provide some other influence into, or to help support other discussions that are already ongoing, this is feedback, as we will continue to obtain other feedback that we will utilize whatever chance makes sense to be able to incorporate it into.
Councilor Pleasant? Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about part of the direction that we had about replacement of city capital funding for transit with something that's not property tax supported, and just to see how that is going in terms of the discussions with London Transit.
Ms. Barbone.
Through the chair, that is referring to the resolution, I believe, just to confirm, is that where we were asked to take a look at other sources of financing specifically? So we've been looking at that, and certainly all of the other sources of financing, particularly the additional incremental one-time funding that we had received from the federal government, has been allocated in this budget already. So there's really nothing left to try to replace that other funding with, unless there's something we're going to take out. So most of the funding we have has been fully allocated. There isn't anything as an alternate source that we could identify that could in fact replace that to try to look for an alternate vehicle to remove that reduction.
Deputy Mayor?
Okay, I did want to just respond to this idea that the boards and commissions, what they were asked to do. The resolution that we passed at council said, encourage boards and commissions who submitted draft budgets in excess of the budget targets, that's the 1.5%, to submit potential opportunities for reductions, be prepared to address the impacts of a reduction to their budget to achieve the budget target, which is 1.5%. So, I mean, I think that's why you're seeing answers from people say, what would happen if it went to 1.5? Because that's what we asked them to do in the resolution.
So noted. Thank you, colleagues. I'll remind you that in the consent agenda for these two items, one is receiving it for information. The second is on 2.2 is to refer this portion to the budget process. I have no one else on the speakers list. I do have Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and I promise I'll be quite brief here. First of all, to Councillor Morgan's point, I've actually shared out some of the videos to constituents. They are very helpful. They're very easy to understand, and people have enjoyed sharing those. And I want to pick up on items that Councillor Turner and Councillor Pelosa both raised. I do hope that in the feedback on this initial public engagement, it's been heard by our staff that the public didn't really like the way the survey was designed. And I noted as a member of the library board, multiple times it was said in there, love the library, the other cultural stuff is really not that important to me. And that might be important to other people, but that was a really standout example to me where one thing that people felt had a really good value was in a category with something that they communicated in their feedback wasn't as high a priority value for them. So I think in the future, if we can somehow create a survey where we can itemize our services in a way that the public understands, I think it's something that's very clear for us to understand, but not so much for the general public. And I think it would be helpful to have their feedback through a process that they feel comfortable responding in. So I just hope as we move forward, we take that as constructive criticism and work to refine our survey for the public so that we can get better feedback from them going forward. And then just through you, Mr. Chair, through to Deputy Mayor Helmer, I appreciate you pulling up that resolution. To me, I think that the potential reductions was in there, but I think that your point to the 1.5% is quite fair. It was part of the resolution, so I could see where boards and commissions would do that. And I appreciate the fact that they did identify the impacts of what 1.5% would mean. I just was disappointed in that some of the ones that responded, and not everyone did. And to Councillor Hopkins' point, I understand that not everybody's finished their process, but some of the ones that did respond didn't respond with any potential reductions other than the impacts of 1.5%. Perhaps that's on us to be a little clearer in terms of our expectations.
Thank you. Councillor Van Meerberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the first one, which is the Christmas tree collection, only because it's somewhat topical. And there seems to be a little bit of confusion in the public. And I'm wondering if Mr. Stanford could maybe give us more detail on what actually happens currently when these trees are picked up with this collection.
Through the chair, the trees are picked up and brought to Tri-Recycling, and there they are chipped and composted along with the other leaf and yard materials that are also collected from the City of London.
Well, thank you for that, because I think there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of people think they're just being picked up and tossed into the landfill. So I think we get that message out. That's useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Going once, twice. I'll remind colleagues as well, by the way, that this again is intended to be a referral to the budget process, where I'm confident we'll have all these discussions again. But are there any other comments that haven't been referenced that colleagues would like to make? And sincerely, Councillor Hopkins.
Since you're asking, I'm just going to follow up.
It was a
on-
dangerous precedent, I know.
I just couldn't resist. And the reason I couldn't resist is Councillor Turner raised the point about the Get Involved London feedback and the questions, the two questions that were asked. And the question number 2, I do have to reiterate his concern, as it was my concern when I was reading this, that we necessarily do not provide the information to the public so they can answer it in an educated way. And I'm raising this because Councillor Cassidy and I met with planning staff this morning about community engagement. And again, it really underlines the need on how we do community engagement, and there must be a better way to do it. And it really, just from a result from a survey, can really send things in a different direction if we don't really understand the details behind the question that we're asking. So I would really encourage staff to look at the way we ask these questions, what are we asking, and what we're going to do with that information, because if we're going to do surveys, I think they do have to mean something to some extent. And I just want to thank staff too for coming out to the community meetings and engaging with the community with the budget. I find as a councillor, to me, the budget process is very, very important, and the more that we can engage with the community, educate the community on the process that we're undertaking, the community understands a bit more where their taxes are going to and the reasons why. So thanks again for the work that you put into this. And again, to ask the question with the Get Involved site, I assume it's all up and running, and that the community can get involved and take the, last time we had the, do your own budget, as well as I heard the videos, but is everything up and running?
Ms. Barbone.
So through the chair, so just a broader, if I might, through this whole process, is something we did differently this year is we started trying to engage the public early in June, which was long before we even had a budget that we could comment on. So this was a strategy we had identified to try to look at with limited resources. How do you try to take if you have so much money, and spread it across, and to try to determine what people valued most. So I take the comments, and we'll try to come up with a better way in the future of how we might do that. But certainly from using the JARS and the sessions across some of the sessions that we did with the public, that certainly was a useful exercise that people really had a hard time and understood some of the challenges the council has to make with respect to passing a budget. So all of the tools, so that was the first phase. The second phase now is we have the stuff up there with respect to all of the business cases to get feedback specifically on the additional investments as well as the reductions for people to comment on. So all of that information, the survey launched early or at the end of December after we put forward everything. So it is all there up and running for the public. There's links to all of the questions and answers and all of the information for people to be able to access if they have questions. The finance flicks are all on the city's website as well, that we're working on links to try to make those easily visible for people as well. So we will be bringing forward, prior to deliberations, all of the feedback that we have, as well as the public input that we have a PPM scheduled on July 23rd or January 23rd. So we can start to provide all that information before council then starts to do their deliberations. But everything is up and running and open.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, thank you for that. Are we going to be doing the Build a Budget like we did a number of years ago? Is that still available to the public?
Ms. Barbone?
Through the chair, it is not in the same form that it was at that time, just because we try to gear it more to the circumstances that we have this time around, and trying to go forward to that other one. We just didn't have the time with all of the numbers that came in later and the challenges we had this year to be able to do something exactly the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, I'm going to turn your attention to the screen. I think we're in a position now that we can vote.
Closing the vote, motion passes 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I have no scheduled items on the agenda, but I do have one item for direction, the enhanced transit services relating to Richmond Street and Western Street. It's page 51 in your book, and you'll note that signed by Councillor Squires and Councillors Squire and Cassidy, some background, and then a specific motion relating to direction of that civic administration is being asked to deal with the London Transit Commission. And there are two directions there. I'm sure you read that in advance. Do I have a mover? Councillor Squire, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Any comments or questions for them? Or, sorry, any for them or for staff? Councillor Squire, please.
Yeah, I just thought I would set out sort of how this came about and how it fits into what we're doing moving forward. And so I want to make it clear that this is largely and primarily about the access to the provincial funding and federal funding that we're going to be looking at for transit projects. As you know, there's still a great amount of that money left. And Councillor Cassidy and I wanted to make sure that there were at least projects identified along those two routes that would have the potential to receive that funding. This entire exercise took about 20 minutes, actually. I met with Ms. Pellegny, the general manager of LTC, and I met with Ms. Scheer in her office. That took about 15 minutes. I identified exactly what I've said to you, to them, and told them to draft the recommendation, something they could work with, something that would allow them to try to access this money. And shortly thereafter, a draft was prepared. I made a small change. It went to the clerk. I then said to Councillor Cassidy, sent it to her, what do you think? She said, fine. So I don't intend to talk about this for too long this evening. All I'm saying is that there are infrastructure projects that will be brought to the table to access the provincial and federal funding. And I think it's important that if there are projects along two major routes, Western Road, Warncliffe, and Richmond Street, that those infrastructure projects be undertaken. There are examples right now of projects like that. If you look at the Sarnia Road, Western Road intersection, not a very efficient intersection. I have no intention of trying to finalize anything or say what I support or might support, but I'll tell you this, when it comes back to council, I will be looking, and I hope other council members will be looking at the transit system in its entirety. Not the north section, not the west section, not other sections. And if projects that are put on the table for this section have less priority or less relevancy to the council, I would accept that other projects might be supported. That's all that this is about at this point in time, and that's really all I have to say at this point.
Any other comments or questions with respect to this? Might I add, just to reflect on your thinking, we have roughly about, and I can stand to be corrected, approximately $150 million of federal and provincial funding still available as a result of the initial transit funding that was set aside and supported by municipal funding as well. And if I might, I'd just like to direct a question to Ms. Scheer on this same question, and that is, you would have received at an earlier council meeting a request for some thoughts, ideas around specific project ideas related to the West End. Is it your intention to bring all of these forward at the same time for consideration?
Your Worship, that would be our intent as well.
Any other, Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. Since you raised it, with respect to the, I think, estimate approximately $150 million in provincial and federal funding that may be accessed, what would be the required municipal contribution to access those full funds?
Would I go to Ms. Barbone for that? Ms. Scheer.
Off the top of my head, Your Worship, I don't have that figure. Certainly, there would be a requirement for municipal participation. We also don't know which projects would be eligible, so we'd have to go through that approval process and bring back all of that financing, but definitely there would be a requirement to find the municipal share.
Councillor Turner?
As I recall, I think the municipal expectation is between 20 to 30% of a project's cost. So that would be an additional up to $50 million roughly of municipal contribution, which is unbudgeted at this time because we've consumed the entire amount for the rapid transit projects that we'd set out earlier. So anything new in order to access that would be new budget funds at the municipal level in order to access the provincial and federal funds.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
I just wanted to recognize that the Vice President of the University Student Council, Ms. Dunn, is here, and I'm going to assume she came to listen to me. I mean, I don't know why I would do that, but I'm really glad she's here because transit is hugely important to Western students, and I always want to recognize how much they support our transit system. They are the ones who sign up for transit en masse and really support the system. So I didn't want to embarrass you, but I'm glad you're here.
You would never do that, Councillor Squire. No. But it's nice to recognize people in the gallery from time to time. Any other comments or questions with respect to this? It's been appropriately moved and seconded. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, motion passes 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll turn your attention under point 5 of the agenda, deferred matters and additional business, starting with 5.1. I'm going to break this down into two points here. We have a letter received from Councillor Sully with respect to his resignation from the London Police Services Board. As we look to, and I'm going to split that apart from his recommendation because we also have a requirement now to replace Councillor Sully, as irreplaceable as he is, with another councillor. And he's made a recommendation, but let's start first with, if I might, by splitting this in half and receiving his resignation. But as I do, look for a mover and then a seconder, I want to say, as a member of the Police Services Board, you've done a great job, sir. And I want to say thank you very much for your leadership on the board for all this time. Is there a mover?
I'd be happy to move his resignation.
Councillor Cassidy beat you to it, but I'll let you second that there, Councillor Squire. Any comments or anybody want to say something nice about Councillor Sully, as long as it's brief and in 5 words or less? Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, I just want to say briefly, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor for his service on the board. And, you know, any returning members of council, including Councillor Squire, witnessed a lot of changes at the Police Services Board during his tenure there. And a lot of it driven by Councillor Sully, and even before Councillor Sully joined the board, I think he really pushed a lot of change in that area. And so I just want to say, again, thank you for your service, Councillor.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Kayabaka, excuse me.
Thank you. Through your chair, I also wanted to take a moment to thank Councillor Sully for the sacrifice that he made for a lot of people to be on the police board, and the amount of work that he put in. There's been a lot of changes, like Councillor Cassidy mentioned, but there's also been a lot of changes in the Black community, and the relationships that have been built through the work that Councillor Sully did is tremendous, and I wanted to recognize that, and I want to thank him for taking one for the team.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst. By the way, I think it's really nice when people say nice things and we're still alive to hear them. This is really good. Councillor Van Holst, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, last term when we were a very new council, deciding how to create our division of labor, we thought it was important to have people play to their strengths, and Councillor Slee was an obvious choice for this board, and he certainly didn't disappoint us. So thanks again. You've served quite a time, and it's good now that we've all or many of us have quite a bit more experience. We're able to take on those roles, having seen how they work.
A lot of the rookies do too, I know. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you first, just a point of clarification. If the majority vote no, does that mean he has to stay? Okay, so I might vote no just to make you stay on, Mo. But I do want to thank Councillor Sally for his service on the police board. I sat in the gallery and listened on more than one occasion to his passionate pleas for changes to the carding process, for example, and the street check process, and for good reason. He was a champion of that change. And it's not just being a champion for the Black community. Councillor Sally has been a champion for both visible and invisible minority groups through his work on the police board. I know that the LGBTQ community certainly feels that their relationship with the police is better and stronger than it was thanks to some of his leadership. And I know that that doesn't stop with that community. It goes to a number of minority communities in this city who feel that they've been better represented and better respected by the police services thanks to your work. So thank you, my friend, and I look forward to having more of your time at CAPS.
Can I mention that the effective date of the resignation is January 16th, so we are stuck with where you still have Councillor Slee with us for a little bit longer, and you can continue to say nice things about him until the 16th as chair of the Police Services Board. So with that, we have a motion to receive, duly seconded, the resignation effective January 16th of Councillor Slee from the London Police Services Board. I will turn your attention to the screen.
Closing the vote, motion passes 14-1.
Councillor Lewis, what do I do with you? Okay, I have no idea. I didn't check who it was. Thank you again, Councillor Slee. Now, what we're looking for is an appointment as from January 16th, which is our next Police Services Board. At the end of that meeting, when the chair, his tenure will be completed. So I will be looking for a motion. Sorry, I'll be looking for appointments as a member of the Police Services Board. Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Cassidy if she's interested.
Councillor?
I will let my nomination stand.
Seconded by Councillor Slee. Any other names put forward? It's a very high-paying job, I want you to know. Then I'll look for a motion to close nominations. Councillor Slee, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. I'll turn your attention. Sorry, we're going to do a hand vote, but Councillor Lehman, you want to say something?
I'm sorry, I have to weigh in here. This is a very important position, and I just found out about this today. I think Councillor Cassidy would be a fine appointment to the board, but I think I would feel more comfortable if people had a little bit more time to consider if they wanted to throw their hat in the ring. I think, so I'm not too sure how to go about this. Do we vote this? I don't want to vote against Councillor Cassidy, but I would like to somehow, and advise me, Chair, on how to go about this. Postpone this procedure until perhaps the next council meeting.
I'm going to check with the clerk. We may be challenged by some of the timing related to the next council meeting relative to the tenure of the chair. But bear with me as we just check for some thoughts around this. I wonder if it would be, thank you, I've received some quiet, discreet advice from the clerk. And the suggestion might well be that, and it's at the pleasure of committee, but we can defer this till the council meeting, and that giving everyone a full and complete opportunity to consider the role. And that's at the pleasure of the committee as to what they would like to do. So if it would be so that meeting is going to be obviously next Tuesday, our council meeting. I don't think that impedes the timing of the resignation of Councillor Salee, which we've already accepted. So, and I don't think it would necessarily limit coverage on the Police Services Board from that council meeting. So if it's the pleasure of committee to defer, knowing that this is going to be subject to approval by council regardless. Councillor Salee, do you have a thought?
Yeah, thank you. And if it's helpful, I did write the letter December 20th and submit it at that point, but because of the winter holidays, I believe the cutoff was changed a little bit differently, so that's why it wasn't added on until the agenda, I think, until the 6th yesterday, if I'm looking to the clerk to confirm that. That's correct. So I did communicate early as possible as I could, but with the holidays and the change of the outline, so apologies to my colleagues, as well as, apologies that I wasn't able to talk to as many people to see if there was an interest from other members of the community. I know in the past, the reason I asked Councilor Cassidy, in the past, we've had communications about the policing and the impacts in our community, and we had multiple conversations. And also because I didn't want to impact quorum, there was only so many people I could talk to. Already 2 of the members on the Police Service Board are with me on council, so it's very limited how many people I can speak to. So apologies for that. I do want to say that there is some time sensitivity to, ensuring that there is, continuum. But I don't think it's the end of the world if council decides to defer it till council meeting. But then at council, it's challenging because we only get 5 minutes to speak at that point. And it might just be a little more logistically more challenging. I'm confident that Maureen Cassidy could do the work that's needed. So, my motion still stands, but I'll listen to what my colleagues have to say and see if there's any more concerns.
One thing that has struck me, thank you. One thing that has struck me is that this is a council that has done a great job of working together and trying to find consensus when they can and come to the right place. So if we are going to do this ultimately, we would need a referral to the council meeting. I'm just giving you some of the background on this, and then we'll hear from colleagues. A referral to the council meeting, which is when we are going to finally approve it regardless as council. But I have Councillor Hopkins on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I understand Councillor Lehman's concerns. I just found out about this right now. So I think in fairness, if there's anyone that would like to sit on the Police Service Board, and there is time that is allowed, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't give other colleagues an opportunity to look at it, and if they're very interested, put their name forward. And that's not to say anything against Councillor Cassidy and what she would provide to the board, but I think there's nothing wrong in allowing other colleagues to submit their name if they wish to.
So I have a motion from Councillor Lehman to refer. Councillor Hopkins, are you seconding that? Okay. Any other comments or questions? I thought so. Any other Councillor Pelosa?
Thank you, Your Worship. Slightly have a cold, slightly just really disappointed. I usually keep my questions and comments policy driven, but as per Councillor Sully's letter, if he's concerned about more women serving the board, and certainly there's only 4 of us in this space. If we're concerned about representation of other groups, I also identify as Métis. A little bit disappointed that I didn't have a heads up on this. Certainly my board plate is full at this moment, but if we're talking about having more people serving, was a little bit disappointed of how this came forward today. So certainly I'll support the referral to give everyone else an equal opportunity to see if they'd be able to serve in this capacity, not questioning Councillor Cassidy's aptitudes at all, just really disappointed in how someone's name come handpicked already forward.
Thank you. I heard 2 things. I heard certainly Councillor Salee say that if it's a referral, then that may well work, and I'm not trying to predetermine his vote. And I certainly heard a number of people say this is not a personal reflection on the councillor whose name has been put forward, who's accepted that her name be put forward. Councillor Van Holst, do you have a thought?
Thank you. I would certainly support the referral. I have only great things to say about Counselor Cassidy, but I certainly don't want it to seem like she got the position because people were caught off guard. So putting this to the next council meeting won't have a negative impact, and I think that'll make our process seem more robust and fair.
We may, Mr. Carr, do you have something you wanted to contribute? I thought I saw a wink and a nod.
Well, Your Worship, I was just looking at the Police Services Act to see what the timeline was for an appointment. And what it says, Section 27, Sub 11 says, if the position of a member who is appointed by the municipal council or who holds office by virtue of being the head of a municipal council becomes vacant, the board shall notify the council, which shall forthwith appoint a replacement. So forthwith is one of those vague terms that means please do it soon. And I don't believe that the request from the board is necessary to trigger that obligation when the council has received the notice of the resignation from that appointee himself. So, I mean, certainly if the board becomes aware that this has occurred, it should be making a request to you for an appointment. But forthwith probably means a council meeting or two, so there isn't a big rush to do this.
So noted, and I'd mentioned before, colleagues, that we would have to have this approved at council regardless. Councillor Salee, you had a thought.
Yes, and I first want to say, thanks for my colleagues for sharing their perspectives. And again, I know I kind of alluded to it. It was no intent to not give an opportunity to my other colleagues, and it's definitely a learning opportunity for me to reflect on. So I take ownership of that that call. My intent was to ensure that we can bring a new perspective on board. Like I mentioned, I had conversations in the past with Maureen Cassidy, Councillor Cassidy. I was afraid of quorum. There was only a limited number of people I could speak to. I had to consult with my current police board members. So I was cautious over that, and I didn't want to, start just talking to as many people because there's only so many people you could talk to before it's an issue of quorum. And, just if I talked to every woman on this, including our board members, that would have been a quorum. So I had to make a decision. So I wear that and, apologize if that's how you feel. So, and I'll do better in the future.
Well, we
and
already...
sorry, I do support, recognizing everything that's been said here today, I do support the referral. So if it's easier, if we don't even need to vote, I'm happy to withdraw my motion so that it can come forward if that's cleaner, so my colleagues don't have to find themselves in an awkward position of having to vote.
Except you didn't make the motion. But, so our choice then, colleagues, but again, in the spirit of all those nice things said about you, that's certainly consistent. So you're suggesting that the motion be withdrawn. The other choice is that we can refer, so I'll look to the mover and ask if, Councillor Kaibaga, if you're comfortable withdrawing it at this time.
I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you very much. So colleagues, we've dealt with the, excuse me. So the vote is still to refer though. So while I suggest it would be withdrawn, the other point is we look for, we've got a motion to refer, moved and seconded. May I call the question? Colleagues, your attention to the screen.
Closing the vote, motion passes 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues, not only for the dialogue around it, but everyone's understanding and support of this as well. I think it's thoughtful and it's a great way to go forward. I appreciate that. Colleagues, 5.2 is the confirmation of appointment to the Argyle BIA. I'll turn your attention to page 53. Melanie O'Brien, her name has come forward as the appointee, acknowledging that two individuals, Matt McCarty and Brock Merrifield, have resigned from the board. Do I have a mover to confirm that appointment? Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Salee. Comments or questions? Then let's turn our attention to the screen and vote.
Closing the vote, motion passes 15-0.
Thank you very much, colleagues. We now go to 5.3 under the added agenda, the RBC Place London Board appointment recommendations. Before I ask the clerk to speak, I want to acknowledge that the CEO of the London Convention Center's new name, RBC Place, that used to fine us when we were in meetings, but not here when I'm chair. Laurie De Silva's here today. We'd like to acknowledge your presence as well, since we're doing that a lot today in the gallery. But I'd like, actually, if I can, ask the clerk to explain. It's not convoluted, but I just want to be clear what it is that on these recommendations, what it is we've been asked to vote. So clerk, if you could comment, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just wanted to point out that notwithstanding the correspondence that's in front of you, and we have been in touch with Ms. De Silva about this, the appointments for Pettipies and Judd would be Class 1 appointments, meaning that their term would run until November 15th, 2023, and that the Vanderwist appointment would be replacing Mr. White, which is a Class 2 appointment, so the term would end on November 15th, 2020. And so then we'll revisit at this time again next year the Class 2 appointments.
Can I add to that as well that Peter White, who is currently the chair, would remain on the board, as is indicated in the minutes in the memo here, in a membership role as past chair and as a non-voting member until his regularly approved term would otherwise expire November the 15th, 2020.
Yeah, the end of this year.
Actually, they've asked that that be for the end of this year. So with that, I'll look for a motion to accept. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. Comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Just to thank you to Mr. Colvin and Ferguson for their service for the past, that's 6 years. So things have really moved ahead with the convention center. And it's exciting things have been happening. I recall us deciding about the naming possibilities, and that's come to fruition. And things are looking great. They were there during the renovations downstairs, which are fantastic. I've been to many events in the lower floors, and it's great. And I know that good things are going to be happening upstairs as well. So thank you to those civic leaders.
Thank you. I'd like to add for the benefit of colleagues around the table that when I was appointed many years ago to the Convention Center, as it was called then, board, we did not have what is called staggered terms. And the challenge we had was that we, two rookies came onto this board and everyone else left. And it was very, very difficult because I was 1 year on the board and became chair of the board by virtue of terms ending. And it was a decision right at that point that we made was to stagger terms, and that's what you're dealing with today in part. And so I commend the RBC Place management team for ensuring that that continuity continues. That's very helpful for that purpose of the boards, including that support of Peter White in his role as well. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Then let's turn your attention to the screen. We'll vote.
Closing the vote, motion passes 15-0.
Colleagues, we're about to go into confidential session in Committee Room 3, and just before we do, we'll move into public session from Committee Room 3 and end our meeting at that time. So I'll look for a motion to move into closed session. Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Turner. Let's do a hand vote on that. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, colleagues.